Welcome to Beyond the Pump, where today we're going to break down a little bit of a longer journey than I think we were anticipating.
And
Some
he
of the
was
core
anticipating.
movements and exercises, but ultimately exercise patterns that you should likely be including in your workout program, in your clients' programs. You're going to get some deep dive on some ratios and your joint strength, for example, your knee. So listen in, stay tuned, buckle up. We're ready to rock and roll.
Definitely a very rich episode. So leave us a review. That's definitely one of the ways that we know that we're moving in the right direction of the content that we're putting out there. So we are on a mission to collect a certain number across the upcoming months. If you are listening to this in the future, leave us a review all the same. We greatly appreciate it. Driving your car with the e-brake on is what it's like to move inefficiently. And so we look at movement efficiency, movement economy, which is a very big portion of our fitness certification, which is the Certified Fitness Coaching Consultant, CFCC. Just had orientation. And so we're talking about this stuff where being able to train hard and feeling like training is hard doesn't necessarily mean that you're adding a lot of the appropriate mechanical tension on the right structures. And so if we look at, well, why is someone not moving in the way that, you're supposed to have a certain degree of rotation, certain amount of flexion, extension in your spine? When that's not present, why is that not present? What are the restrictions? What are it might not even be something that is like a muscular thing. You might have connective tissue stiffness. You might have a neurological down regulation, so to speak, of like you can't exert force in a specific position because it may be perceived as threatening or compromising. So Yonda did a really good job of breaking stuff up into tissue extensibility dysfunction, which is basically where your tissues aren't pliable enough and they're stiff. You can make change with that. That's where foam rolling, that's where stretching, like those things then become what you do to manage that. But then on the other end, you have joint mobility dysfunction. And joint mobility dysfunction is one of the ways that we think like your joint structure isn't conducive to doing something and you can't change your bone structure. You have to work around that. So when we think about femur lengths or anteverted versus retroverted hips and how the head of your femur and kind of the neck and that femoral neck sits inside of that acetabulum, which is the joint kind of capsule. When you have a certain way that's oriented, it will then change how you have to squat. That's why squat width, squat depth, like those things are highly individualized. If you have longer femurs, you might just have a greater torso angle at the bottom of your squat in order not to fall over. So is that a problem? Is it not? Like those are obviously all only relevant to the degree that the goal is consistent with that. But when we talk about movement selection and exercise selection, what to include that's going to give you the stimulus to adapt that you want. If you want to get better aerobically because you want to go climb a mountain, you better do some aerobic activity, right? But that's where we do a needs analysis and we strongly encourage people to do an assessment to determine what the need is, where the gaps are, and then using exercises and the intensity of those exercises, the intensity of the stressor as a way to drive adaptation. So that's exercise selection in a nutshell.
I'm in the midst of rebuilding my program because I'm now going to attempt to get down below 200 pounds for the first time in 20 years, maybe quite some time. And I want to compete in jiu-jitsu at 199. So we're going to get there. And I'm like, all right, but also I don't want to get to 200 pounds and have lost my strength. So I'm building and I'm trying to maintain strength. But at the same point, if I go what I really enjoy now, which is lift heavy, rest for 3 minutes and all these things, if I just do bench press all the time and I just do my normal squat all the time, that's not conducive to making sure my jiu-jitsu game and my mobility, but like the power and all those things is obviously getting there. So not necessarily talking about the modalities of the training per se and like speed and tempos, but just out of the gates, I'm like, all right, I need to include, and it's like, oh, of course I need a upper body push, and then definitely going to do upper body pulls, and then also need some vertical pulls and all these things. And then all of a sudden I'm like, wow, it's like a 4-hour workout if I include all the things that I want to include, which is probably not advisable. So it got me thinking like, hey, average human. And I realize there's needs, there's use cases, there's goals, there's all of this stuff that matters. But with a bunch of context missing, what would you say the core movement patterns without fail you should be doing at least maybe once a week in your workout? What does that look like for somebody? You're programming for your client, or hey, you're a client, you're listening into this and you're building for yourself.
Thinking about movement patterns. So there's always this conversation of parts versus patterns. It depends on the nature of the goal. In your case, because yours is more performance oriented, you're performing a sport. Your sport is jujitsu, which is turning people into human laundry. And so when we think about that, we would want to identify what the needs, generally speaking, are, because I like to break things down, and we find that there's a lot of people in the performance world tend to look at patterns: squat, push, pull, hinge. Some people add lunging in there, single leg. I just kind of say you can do a single leg hinge version. It doesn't have to be a lunge by itself. Squat, push, pull, hinge. And then I usually say core and ambulation, right? Being able to move. Ambulation is more relevant to like tactical communities where you need to do load carriage, right? You need to be able to hump a pack or carry 120, sometimes 80, depends on what level of kit you have, but you need to be able to carry loads across distances. Those are the 6 patterns that I like to think about when I'm writing programs. And then inside of those, I will examine what the current performance capacity is, right? Compared to the norms for the sport. So in jiu-jitsu, do you need to back squat double your body weight? Not really. Do you need to back squat 500 pounds? Even less so, right? Because jiu-jitsu is weight class oriented, which means that you need to focus on relative strength, which means body weight stuff is probably going to be in muscle endurance and obviously like the time domain 3-5. So you got to be able to work hard for 5 minutes, probably have like a minute, maybe 2 minutes of rest, and then get back in there and exert yourself again. So there's an energy system component to that as well, which we're not talking about in the nature of this conversation. But how do you, when we say conditioning, how do you, the same way that we beat on, you put a piece of metal in a forge, you'll heat it up, you'll pound it, and then you'll cool it off, and then you'll repeat that process because you're conditioning that steel to withstand the performance demand. So just because you have strong legs doesn't mean that those strong legs are going to allow you to continuously perform at the same threshold of intensity. And the last thing is there's a strength threshold, which means that if you squatted every day for 50 years, and you can finally, when you hit your genetic potential, squat 1,000 pounds, you might get 80% of the way to your genetic potential in the first 3 years. And then to go the last 20% takes you 7 or 15. It doesn't make sense because now you're taking away from other time you could be training and other stimuli that you need to prepare for. So when you hyper focus on one thing, you give up other things. And that's where something like periodization comes in of, you might focus on something, a specific characteristic for a given period of time and then alternate that. That also works with movement patterns. And so the thing that you probably want to work on more, we're using jiu-jitsu as a very real world kind of discussion point here, that you need a lot of single leg stuff. You probably need a lot of hinging and a lot of stooping, as some people will say it, because you'll be bending over a lot, and a lot of pulling. Those would be the 3 things that I think you want to prioritize because it's going to allow you to stand up off of a single leg in weird positions. So the general movement pattern itself would be a lunge. That would be your general physical preparedness phase. As you get closer to your actual athletic event, that's where you then try to find skill transfer into, okay, well, you're going to have to stand someone up. Again, I don't know what jiu-jitsu specific looks like these days. Maybe you need to take a shot on somebody. There's a lot of different.
Imagine 220 trying to use brute force and strength on everybody he comes across. That's what it looks like these days.
I mean, small joint manipulation is illegal. So that's, at least I think it is. Ankle locks outside of that. But yeah, so I would say you need to stand up, right? Sometimes you're not always going to be on 2 legs. So you could do a lot of back squatting or front squatting. Front squatting would probably actually be a little more conducive because you're going to be in that funky position. Like you're going to get used to having your collarbones and just being compressed. A lot more sport specific or, specific physical preparedness, and then sport specific. So there's 3 things that we kind of look at: back squatting, squatting in general, squatting heavy, general, specific physical preparedness, starting to look at lunging, and then sport specific might be doing a lunge capacity test in a certain given period of time. 5 minutes, how many lunges can you do in 5 minutes? That's god awful. But that's more specific and preparative for your sport and your competition than back squatting a 1 RM, right? Yeah. They feed each other, but what you focus on in the duration of that depends on how far out you are, what your current capacities are, your ability levels. And so that's one way to break down the squatting pattern. Whether it's a single leg, double leg, you can go either way, but you still need to squat. Just what kind of squatting you do and how often and when is determined by the demand that you're trying to adapt to preemptively.
Yeah, got it. So squats, lunges for hips, upper body,
leg,
pulls.
Pulling. Yeah, because you're going to be pulling people in. You probably want to do twice as much pulling as pushing because you're going to be posting and you're probably going to be, but most of that stuff is probably going to be up in here.
Yeah,
so,
posting is is more based upon your skeletal structure rather than muscular structure. So if you're posting with strength, then you're doing it wrong.
Well, you got to hold the post though, because people are trying
Well,
to get you on a post. They're trying to wrap your leg around
sure,
it,
yeah.
so.
But to your point, a 2-to-1 pull versus push is probably an ideal ratio.
Well, unless you're just
But
like super, if you can do a pull up with your body weight attached to you, so twice your body weight effectively, and you can't bench press your body weight, like that's probably a problematic ratio. And this is where we start getting into something called structural balance, which we talk about in our certification. And this is borrowed from Charles Poliquin. I heard about it through James Fitzgerald at OPEX, one of the best kind of CrossFit fitness coaches, in my opinion. And it's the idea that there's this concept called joint centration, which is where the joint structure to maintain optimal integrity and thus function, right? Because your body's going to down throttle your ability to produce force in a structure that's compromised because you're always trying to survive. And so it's going to, your nervous system does weird shit if it doesn't feel safe. So if your shoulder's like this, you're going to lose the ability for that shoulder to continuously maybe do more pushing, and you're going to hit a strength threshold, which is why getting that arm bone, kind of like that looks like this, you want it to sit in the middle of the joint. So now you have a balanced capacity to push or pull, and you can fully express the force from that joint. And so when we think about structural balance, to your movement pattern question, effectively what we're trying to understand here, what is the current joint centration kind of situation? And how do we want that to continuously evolve? If your ratios are good, and just for frame of reference, some of the literature suggests that for a healthy knee joint, we like to see 110% of a knee extension versus a knee flexion test, right? So you should be able to do a 110-pound, 10-rep max, and I think it's a 10-rep max test, 110 pounds of a knee extension to 100 pounds of hamstring curl, right? Like that would be an appropriate ratio. If you do 110 pounds of knee extension or 150 pounds of knee extension, you can only do 30 pounds of a hamstring curl. Your knee is really good at straightening. It is terrible at preventing anterior translation. So that means that you might have some potential structural compromise as that leg tries to straighten and your hamstrings trying to keep that knee in place. Right. So we see people that have massively strong hamstrings that don't even know they have an ACL tear sometimes. It's crazy. John Wellborn, right? NFL player. He's a linebacker, huge motherfucker. We were at a CrossFit football certification. He was like, yeah, I tore my ACL, didn't know for like a couple of years because my hamstrings were so strong. I'm like, that's crazy. So when people say how much and what kind, those are the things that I think about that we, again, train people on to start to understand like everyone's going to have different needs. That's why doing general templates, especially when you have a specific performance outcome, you can't do that. If you just want to look a little bit better and do whatever, sure. But every goal eventually becomes performance oriented when you want to stave off aging and a loss of function. Because the opposite of a loss of function or being able to perform tasks is the ability to perform them better and at a higher level to give you more buffer. Every goal is performance oriented. You just change when you start to focus on that. If you get old, too late. Not really. You can definitely reclaim that, but I don't know why you wouldn't want to be jacked and functionally fit, meaning you can do things, you can do more things. Yeah. Anyways, that's what I have to say about movements. It depends, and that's what it all depends on.
Here are the, again, ones you should, generally speaking, do. Goal and context removed.
That you should predicates that there's an intent. What's the intent, Steve?
There is no intent. Should most people squat?
Everyone should have an element of squatting, hinging, pushing, and pulling in their program. If you don't want those things to break, you also need to do core patterning, anti-rotation, anti-flexion, anti-extension, single leg, double leg, single arm, double arm. Those just add variety and variability. If you're wildly asymmetrical, do both, right? Or do, kind of single leg, right? If you don't really have a big issue and you're just trying to get super jacked and strong, do a little bit of the bilateral stuff. And then ambulation, right? Being able to carry stuff and walk. And, people always talking about getting your steps in. Well, some people, when they get their steps in, their ankles kind of get beat up, right? So then that changes what you do with the other stuff. But those are generally like the 6 patterns that we break down. And I think that everyone should be doing those to some degree.
Okay. Are there any hey, if you have time, the next things that you might layer on, what would those be? So you're saying a push and a pull. Does that pull mean a horizontal row as well as a vertical pull? Both?
Yeah, you break them up.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I would say squatting and hinging, lower body dominant, right? The distinction between squatting and hinging is effectively more hip extension flexion, like the hips are doing probably more of the work. In a hinge, we see more knee flexion, knee extension in a squat dominant pattern where the torso just remains a little more upright. So torso angle, but you can take those squatting and hingings and make them unilateral, bilateral. When you start doing things like with the upper body, right? Now we understand that there's multiple planes of motion, transverse plane, sagittal plane, frontal plane. And so when we think about breaking some of those up, we know that, you got to push and pull sometimes overhead. You got to push and pull horizontally. If all you do is just overhead shit, I mean, you're going to run into CrossFit circa 2013 when everyone's getting shoulder replacement surgeries and rotator cuff repairs, right? So that's why joint balance and kind of structural balance as a way of thinking about things is really important to make sure that the ratio of how the muscles are firing around the joint preserves the joint, because you only got so many motions that you can do in a joint if you believe that paradigm before you're going to need to replace structures, or before structures just start to break down, the same way that a door hinge only opens, a couple million times before it starts to degrade in terms of its structural integrity. So if we accelerate through that because movement economy or movement effectiveness or just movement quality is poor, you accelerate that. And that's where, people are having knee replacements early in life, so on and so forth. So that's how I would break that up: upper, lower, squat, hinge, one leg, two leg. Same thing with upper body, right? Vertical, horizontal, bilateral, vertical, unilateral, vertical, one arm horizontal, two arm horizontal, right? And if you start doing single arm, single leg stuff, you actually add a rotational demand and you actually start to integrate a little bit more core work. So if you're jammed up for time, doing one arm, one leg exercises can be very helpful to consolidate and not have to get on the ground and do some crunches later or whatever. Right. And I'm not a big advocate for crunches.
Well, I think it's important, right? Because most people don't know where to start. They shove a whole bunch of stuff in. They do 14 chest exercises a week and only 3 rows a week and 1 lunge and no anything else, or some mismanaged thing, and wonder, why am I getting injured, or why this or why that? And obviously we're talking averages. This is minimal context. There's seasons and you might do more, i.e., hey, I'm going to do this jiu-jitsu thing. I'm going to do more pulling than I am going to do pushing. Spot on, right? Like it's just naturally one of the things that needs to happen to succeed in that. But on the other side of the season, I need to go back to doing a little bit more pushing. But while I'm doing my pushing, I'm also weekly going to do a bench and try to ensure I'm tracking and make sure I'm not diminishing too much in what my force output, volume, etc. truly is, just to track. Like I expect some type of degradation, but I just don't want it to be a lot because I'm just not going to do it as much.
Well, you should see degradation in your case. If you don't, that's a problem, because this is why.
The weight loss and things. Yes,
I mean that, and as you allocate more time to doing jiu-jitsu, you're gonna have less time. So you enter a strength maintenance phase, and that's where you're touching 85% of your maxes and getting out.
Bro, less time. I'm just going to the gym 11 times now a week. Stop. We don't have less time. We just do more.
I love that journey for you, and I look forward to the rehab process on the other side.
Yeah, I got to work on this rehab thing, this whole knee and ankle and stuff. But you say it, but like Whoop is telling me to keep going. Whoop is saying, are you even trying?
Actually, that's a very rich topic of wearables and performance and being predictive, because ideally this is where people forget that wearables are just one indication of what might be going on, and they're helpful because it's what's under the hood. There's just so much when it comes to managing inputs that sometimes wearables can actually be decrements. They can provide performance decrements because you'll push through something that probably shouldn't be pushed through.
Nope. 96%, bro.
And I think there's also a call out that warrants consideration, is that I would say the majority of people that are exercising aren't doing a plan or a program. The small percentage of people that are, probably say like 15% of the population of gym goers, are on a structured plan or a program. And I'd say that like half of that is actually following the program. And I'd say even less than that, we're talking about under 5%, is taking time to reflect and readjust their program. And if you're not doing that, there's so much performance being left on the table. Hey, how did I perform? One of the biggest indications of adaptation and progress is doing more. So if you try really hard this week and you get 100 pounds, you should try really hard next week. And the volume load or the intensity should increase 10 to 30% week over week. If it's doing more than that, you might have really fucked up in the beginning and just undershot, or you're just not appropriately stressing or straining the system. Or sometimes it's even indicative that you need to change the program or the plan altogether.
Whoop
Do
saying,
our
keep
search.
going. Whoop is saying only 10 a week, bro. Come on now. I thought you could try hard.
You remember when we were doing all the when we first started working together, and you thought that 60 seconds of rest was a lot?
Yep.
I think we're kind of getting into that, but just with the density of work that you're doing.
No, I take Sundays off.
I love this for you. Good. Everyone has these. Everyone has these.
I take from 11 a.m. on Saturday until Monday morning at 5 a.m. off. It's almost 48 straight hours of downtime.
I mean, 2 days for 2 injuries. I think that's appropriate. It seems about right.
It's one injury. It's related.
Why don't you just take 3 days off and see what happens, and then take 1 day off?
You're going to keep doing this.
I wonder what the ratio is, because you do have a ratio. The more training sessions in a smaller period of time becomes predictive. But that's the shit that Whoop can't tell you, unfortunately. Yeah. So it's like...
The weird thing is, when I went through the past couple of weeks of chilling, because I was doing 9 a week, my recoveries were less. I wasn't as recovered. And now that I'm back up to pushing hard again this week, my recovery, I'm like, it just doesn't, like, I know it's me, it's what I do, but it just doesn't add up. Like, I did 3 workouts on Monday. I woke up Tuesday expecting to be blasted. I woke up at an 87% recovery.
So in that case, I would say that for you, because now you're at the point where you've been training long enough, I think your performance, because you're in the intermediate category, as of like a couple months ago, because you've been training greater consistently for 3+ years, that's usually the threshold. And so now in your case, performance becomes a better indicator than your Whoop. So if you have percentages that you're supposed to be hitting every week, and those either get easier or harder, that'll tell you if you're moving in the right direction. Injuries also are largely predictive. So your system's just jacked up if you're more sensitive to pain and like you're having these things that are kind of bugging you. There are things that convolute the pain signal and like mess with your ability to interpret biofeedback, and the peptides could be a masking signal too, because now we're accelerating the healing process, but the conditions that precipitated the injury, or we added other things that decreased or dampened the perception. So that's also something to consider. But I would say your overall workloads would be the thing you'd want to measure of what's the tonnage and what's the density. How much did you squat, like 100 pounds, 10 times, 1,000 pounds of tonnage? Because you have a threshold right now of what that in short of a period of time you can tolerate before you start to run into increased injury risk. Monotony is another thing as well. So this is why training jiu-jitsu all the time is important in phases, and then doing more strength conditioning and doing more rolling and like kind of undulating those two is one way to make sure that you don't run into that increased monotony and increased injury risk.
All right, gang. We appreciate you hopping on today, listening to us Beyond the Pump. If this is for you and you're building your own program, right in there, we clip that piece out. Those are the movements you need, 6 of them. Those are your core basics. No context, no nothing, right? If you're programming for somebody, you should probably be over a long enough period of time, including some good balance of all those things. You had some ratios thrown in here. So generally some good information. By the look of Andrew's face, working out 10 times a week is probably not ideal for most people, but hey, here we are. And apparently I thrive when I'm stressed. So there's that too. Thanks for listening to Beyond the Pump. We break down the business of fitness and nutrition. We'll see you guys next time. Subscribe to the channel, like the episode, throw a comment down below. If you want us to break down something else, we're here for you.
Oh, no.